Hey, I'm Bacon, and this one, it's coming a little late. Apologies for that, but I am going to be presenting several, I'll say, refinements to the what I originally called, I think, a model, but it's not a model because it's not trying to predict anything. It's also not a theory because I'm not trying to test anything. Um, so, framework may be a good word, philosophy, possibly, matrix. I don't know what the correct word is. I'm going to go with thoughts, right? These are my thoughts on role play. I think that's generally a safer word to use. There's no baggage. There's no connotation of testing or predictability or whatever. So I'm just going to go with thoughts. So these are my thoughts on role playing as they've come to be refined over the past, I don't know how long it's been, week, 2 weeks, I don't know, something like that. So there have been three contributors to this refinement process, three major contributors, I'll say. One is Drudenfutz, who I've been speaking with in Discord messages, for whom I have a great deal of thanks to offer for the willingness to entertain the conversation. Ivan Mike, who I streamed with last week, who I again thank greatly. He gave me some perspective, and Anthony from Runeslinger, who I had a conversation with on his channel, which was recently published. The Ivan Mike conversation and the Runeslinger conversation, I'll go ahead and link in the description below. Um, so I kind of just want to rattle off some ideas here, right? They're going to be loosely connected. I have some notes here in front of me that I'm probably going to read, but I'm going to also wing it for a little bit of the explanation when I feel like it's necessary. So first, I want to start with this: RPGs or role-playing game books, the books on which the cover states it is a role-playing game. Um, that's just a tool, right? So you can say you're playing an RPG or a role-playing game, and you I'm going to buy a book, right? I'm going to buy a book. On the cover, it says role playing game. I can read the whole book. I can sit down. And I went over this briefly in the Ivan Mike discussion. And then also, I think, with Anthony at Runeslinger. You can buy the book. You can read it cover to cover. You can sit down at the table. You can implement everything in that book from cover to cover. But that doesn't mean that you're role playing, right? So that book is a tool that facilitates the role playing. So role playing is what is actually done at the table. Now, the tools that you use can be better suited than other tools to that end, but it all depends on the experience the group is looking for. So, in my view, everyone gets together initially who decides they want to play a role playing game with these particular individuals at this time, on this date, whatever. And then the very first thing you do at the outset, before you even pick a game or a system or a book or a tool, is you define the experience that you all want to have. Maybe it's a fantasy experience, maybe it's a medieval authentic experience, maybe it is a sci-fi experience, horror, whatever that happens to be. You define that experience. And then that is going to give you a kind of a, I don't want to call it a goal, but it's essentially going to be a theme. Now I know I said originally I said in my very first video that role playing games don't really have themes, and they don't, but there is this defining experience that you all want to have at this particular table during these particular sessions that you've defined beforehand. And so that acting as a theme, the role play that happens at the table should always point back to that experience. So that's idea one, I guess, is that the role play should always point to the experience. Idea two is that I don't know if it's really an idea, but I'm going to just be removing the GNS terminology. I don't think it's fit for purpose, and that's evidenced by the fact that everyone understands simulation to be something different. So I have asked several people, and I've done some research on my own to see what the simulationism is, and I have gotten GURPS, I have gotten Hornmaster as examples of simulation style games, but then also in my conversation with Ivan Mike, um, he essentially defines simulation as something that would I say falls within my definition of what role playing is. You're trying to simulate the existence of another uh, of another person. You're occupying that headspace, and you're really trying to simulate that. Now, I would trust, and assuming that I understood him correctly, and I believe that I did, and I think there's indications in our conversation that I had that would indicate that I do. Um, it's still not fit for purpose, even if that is the correct understanding of what's meant by simulationist. There are still several people out there who hear the word simulationist, need a description, and then don't get it right because I have been told that it's several different things. Um, and so I have decided to go with um, the system, which would be the game system itself. What math are you using? What dice are you rolling? The setting and the drama, which, as the role play will point toward the experience, the system, setting, and drama should all facilitate the role play in achieving that experience. And then I'll say that the role play itself is the plot. So whatever the characters are doing, whatever they choose to do, the decisions that they're making is the plot. So that's not something that's pre-constructed. It's something that's taking place in the moment as the characters are deciding what it is that they're doing, as they're expressing themselves through conversation or through action. That's the plot. So I'm going to start talking about system, setting, and drama because those are better, more well understood, easier to communicate terms that don't require essays and essays and essays of explanation. You know what's meant when system is said, when setting is said, or when drama is said. And I think that's ultimately is going to serve the discussion a lot better to use those terms. So in that, I'm going to be getting away from GNS and the big model, which really just plugs GNS directly into the larger framework, which causes those same issues, which you know, as I was just saying about how system setting and drama are easy to understand, easy to communicate. The terms that are used within GNS and the big model are they're unwieldy. They require too much explanation, and as I previously said, largely misunderstood. So I will be shifting away from using those terms. I don't think that they're that helpful. So let's see. The idea that this is going to be idea 3, I guess. So, or thought 3. I don't know, whatever the hell we're calling these. Whatever. So, third point is going to be that, as I said, there's going to be the defining experience that's named by the group. The role play should point to that experience. And then the system, setting, and drama should all support the role play in pointing to that experience, right? Now, within this sort of idea, within this thought, it's perfectly okay to diminish the role play element as long as it's to better achieve the desired experience. But this is where my issues start. So before I even got here to do this recording, I was putting role play on a sort of a sliding scale with metagaming at one end, That would be removing the player from the character as much as possible, like playing with a doll in the sandbox, to borrow an example that Drudenfutz gave me. An immersion on the other end, which is aligning the player as much as possible within the mind of the character. Now, neither extreme is truly achievable, but it is in the ends of the scale that matters. It's the gray area in between. However, in my conversations with all three of the previously mentioned individuals, I came to understand that immersion can take place at various, I'm going to call them game layers, probably not a good term, but immersion can take place as the character. And I think that it's plenty clear when I'm talking about immersion with regard to role play. I specifically mean character immersion, which again is the idea of occupying a headspace that is not your own, speaking in first person, describing your actions. But I think that maybe naming these other areas of immersion, they're not other types of immersion, they're just other areas of immersion, is probably going to be helpful in facilitating the conversation. So what I've been doing, which is not entirely granular, so I'm not there yet by any means, but what I have been doing in my own thought process is um, any immersion in a game layer, and when I say game layer, I mean system, setting, drama, right? Or the umbrella game layer. So you're in a game, you're playing a role playing game. There could be an immersion, like a superficial immersion layer before we even drill down into those different other areas. But any layer that is not character immersion, I've been referring to as meta immersion, which again is likely a poor name, but it's what I have in the moment, so it's what I'm going to use. So meta immersion would be something that doesn't require character immersion, but character immersion does require meta immersion in certain game layers. So drama, for example. This is based primarily, now it is based on conversations I had with all three, but primarily this came out in the conversation that I had with Anthony when he started to describe a situation where chucking the dice and failing a check what had a more immersive effect, or it pulled that particular player more into the immersion because now they failed and they really want to see what happens. What I wanted to happen didn't happen, so what does happen? I will absolutely agree that that can take place, but I would say that that's likely a dramatic layer of immersion, meaning that they want to see what's happening in the story. If it's not something that they've described and that they've attempted and succeeded at attempting with a check, but now their check has failed, so they're immersed in understanding the drama of the situation, the resolution of whatever event is taking place. So I think that that definitely has to be paid consideration, but I think that is not character immersion. I think it's quite plainly not character immersion. And so I've been sort of referring to those as meta immersion because it you're still immersed in what's happening. It's like being immersed in I don't know, me making a video. I can be immersed in this video. I can be immersed in communicating my bullet points and everything, but I'm still me, right? I'm not another character. I'm not role playing at this time. So immersion does obviously exist apart from role play, but when it's discussed with regard to role play, it's character immersion, and then anything else, any other type of immersion that could take place within the game, for the moment, I'm referring to as meta immersion because it's removed from character immersion. So, or immersion, pardon me. So, while I was putting things on that sliding scale and having my conversations and kind of determining that the meta slash immersion scale doesn't work as a broad application across all of my thoughts. Like I can't overlay it across everything. It's a specific particular overlay for character immersion. So, or pardon me, it's a specific overlay for role play to really kind of define, maybe not define, but to sort of maybe facilitate discussion on how immersed in the character you are versus how removed from the character you are. So I guess I'll start calling that character immersion, at least in the moment. Meta immersion, probably a bad term. I need to do a little bit more thinking about that as insofar as it applies to like immersion in systems, immersion in setting. I do think that there are a array of immersion, not immersion types, but there are an array of situations that can produce immersion. And that likely gets into why we role play, et cetera, which I already said I'm not going to get into, but you know, surprise, surprise, I'm going to end up having to get into it at some point or another, but not at this moment. So that's going to be a little bit of a void in my thought process, at least for the moment, but that's okay because it gives me something to speak on in the future. So then what else do I have here? Let me check my notes. What is the next thought? Okay, so here is, let's see. If a group decides that the experience thereafter is to collaboratively tell a story, so not to role play, but to collaboratively tell a story, and they decide to strip down the role playing as much as possible in order to achieve that desired experience, which is possible within this particular thought process that I'm having, the act of stripping out the role play necessarily transforms the game from role playing to whatever it is more appropriately called based on the experience they're trying to achieve, which in this example is going to be collaboratively telling a story. So if you're trying to collaboratively tell a story and you strip out the role play to a necessary degree, you're elevating the collaborative storytelling, that's going to become, you know, a story game, at least how I've presented the example here. There likely could be other reasons to strip out the role playing. I'm having a hard time thinking of them, but again, this is an ongoing process. I'll kick these ideas around a bit more and see what I land on. I really do feel like I do have to consider like the systems aspect a bit more deeply, setting aspect a bit more deeply. But in this example, if your goal is trying to collaboratively tell a story and you're diminishing the role play as much as possible to produce that desired experience, it's no longer a role-playing game. It's a story game or a collaborative story game, because removing the role-playing as much as possible from the game necessarily does that, but then it becomes doubly true because it's being removed in order to support achieving the desired experience, which is stated on its face to not be role-playing. It's to be telling a story. However, since I'm using the same thought process to determine the difference between what I'm calling a story game and a role-playing game, I don't know if this is really a role-playing game or a role-playing framework, to just use that word briefly. It's more of what I had begun to call a meta immersion framework, because that's really kind of what I'm trying to quantify here. And it's under this that both role-playing and story games can be qualified, which does one major thing. So it allows for both types of game to exist under the same continuum, allowing them to be equal but different. So I know there's a lot of struggle and there's a lot of resistance with regard to what you can and cannot appropriately call a role-playing game. Everyone has a different idea, and no one is really willing to bite down on what exactly it is they want a role-playing game to be, with a couple of exceptions. But generally speaking, I would say the vast majority of the field is just entirely hesitant to do that. And it's for reasons like this. It's because they don't want to exclude one type of, you know, I'm not going to call it role play, but they don't want to exclude one type of play from another type of play. I guess they're afraid that it's sort of denigrating the experience or denigrating the type of game that they prefer to play. I'm not interested in denigration. I'm not interested in exclusion. What I'm interested in is conversation. So, and in that, Anthony and Ivan, Mike, and Drudenfutz have been absolutely incredible. Sable Phoenix as well, who I haven't mentioned up to this point, but I also bounce ideas off him. He's great. And I really appreciate the time that everyone has sort of given me for this conversation, the help that they've been in trying to drill down on my thought processes. But I again, I'm not interested in exclusion. I am interested in finely tuning a definition. I am interested in raising partitions. I am interested in specificity, but for the sake of conversation, not exclusion. So I think that it's perfectly fine to say what a role-playing game is, as qualified by the experience that you're trying to have at a table versus a story game as quantified by the experience you're trying to have at a table. And I don't think there really needs to be any vitriol. There doesn't need to be butting of heads. I think that you can respect all of these different styles of play genuinely and equally while calling them what they are, instead of trying to operate under a sort of a nebulous kind of a fluid idea that doesn't. I don't feel like that really helps anyone. It also makes the conversation more difficult, because if I am talking about something specific, if everyone's using the one term to describe all types of play, then it becomes so difficult to sit down and have a conversation about the different aspects of play if you can't even agree on what type of game you're playing, right? So if I say game A is a role-playing game, but you say game Q is a role-playing game, and they're just drastically removed from one another, we're not going to be able to have that conversation because our terms are not going to align, our ideas are not going to align. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do here, I guess, maybe a little bit. I don't know. I just want to get my thoughts out there. So these are my thoughts. So in closing, I feel like story games and role-playing games are similar enough to occupy the same space. As I've said previously, I can take a tool set that's devised for a storytelling game and use it to role-play. I can take a tool set that's devised for a role-playing game and use it to tell a story. Are they going to be the best tools for the job? I mean, maybe. It depends on the experience that you're trying to get at the table. So, I would argue that in most cases, the tool set that's developed for role-playing is going to be best suited for role-playing, and the tool set that's developed for storytelling is going to be best, or collaborative storytelling, I should say. If you want to tell a story, there are better ways to tell a story than doing it in a group setting, right? Like writing a book or a screenplay. But collaborative storytelling has to be collaborative. It's on the tin, right? It's the name on the tin. So if it's a collaborative storytelling tool set, then it's probably going to be best suited toward collaborative storytelling. But I think it's a distinction that's worth making for the sake of those tools, for precisely designing the experience or the tools to derive the experience that players want, that they name at the outset of the game. So I know that this video isn't necessarily flowing as naturally as some of my other videos do. It's kind of it's a little scatterbrained. Hopefully you could follow. If not, I'll do my best to script it a little bit better next time. But this is really just kind of, again, it's an evolving set of ideas. It's a process that I want to go through periodically give updates, where my thought process is, how I'm thinking, why I'm thinking that, who helped me to get to that specific place in the thought process. But that's everything I have for today. Thank you for watching. If you disagree with me, as always, let me know why I'm wrong. And I'm really looking forward to continuing these conversations to drill further down on what exactly I'm trying to get at, or how exactly I think, role playing can be defined or expressed in a more specific way to better aid conversation. So thank you all so much, and I'll talk to you next time. Take care.